for such a treat with this book. I absolutely loved it. And I wanted to just start with having you just give a general description of the book.
So The Bewitching is a supernatural suspense novel in 3 timelines. We are in the 1990s with Minerva, a grad student. We're in the 1930s with another student, the same college where Minerva studied, but it's a girls' college in that time period. And then we're in 1908 in the countryside in Mexico. And the running thread is there's witchcraft in all of those timelines.
Yes, there is, and we're gonna dive into this witchcraft because wow, it completely blew me away. But I have to ask where this story began in your mind. Like, did it start with one of these characters? And we're gonna dive into these characters. Did it start with a setting? What was the initial thought for this book?
I wanted to do something with the folk tales that I grew up with from my great grandmother about witchcraft and the supernatural in Mexico. And I really wanted to do therefore a witch book. But the other thing was that I had lived in Massachusetts for 3 years, and so I had been exposed to a different kind of folklore and witch history. And so I wanted to do another witch book. And so I wanted to do 2 witch books, and at one point they became a sandwich. I realized that they could be put together.
Well, that was my next question, was how you decided to do 3 timelines. So you've mentioned the 2, the 1998 with Minerva. Is that the right pronunciation? Okay, yes. That was the only one I didn't like ask ChatGPT how to pronounce. Like, I got that one. And then now I understand the 1908 timeline with Alba, but the middle one is the one that sort of is sandwiched in between them. So where did that one come from? And how did you know that you needed that to bring these stories together?
Originally it was 4 timelines. I cut one out. So that there was like lettuce and tomato, but yeah, no, I needed a bridging part between these 2 time periods, and I knew I wanted to do that from the beginning. I wanted to do something in the 1930s because that was the heyday of pulp fiction. It's when we get a lot of the original big magazines that are going to become formational for horror fiction, but also for what we know as science fiction, as fantasy nowadays. Magazines like Weird Tales, and other types of magazines too. And so there were a lot of writers in that time period contributing to that aesthetic. And I did that one in first person, because I was trying to do my best Shirley Jackson-ish kind of impersonation. So I know Shirley Jackson actually wrote years later, but I had somebody like her, a little bit like that in the 1930s. And the 4th section, that the tomato that got cut out, was you were actually going to see the story that the writer wrote in the writer from the 1930s wrote. So you were going to see the vanishing, which is mentioned in the novel. You were going to see sections of that. It's going to be like a Matrushka doll sort of situation where you go like big doll, medium doll, tiny doll. At the end, when I was doing my outlining and my sample pages, which I often do, like sample sections, things like that, it just seemed to be too much. It was overflowing, kind of oozing out of the book. And so I decided not to do those chapters, but I did some proof of concept with those where I had some sections, and those would have been that novel within a novel would have been in the 1600s in Massachusetts. So
oh, okay. Well, I love the 3 timelines, and the way that they sandwich together just ends up making perfect sense. But I want to talk about each one individually because of that. I think we just have to get into the characters and the setting that are really at the heart of the book. So let's start with 1998, which is I feel that like that time frame with Minerva is the thread for that ties all of them together. We learn that Minerva's great grandmother Alba, she's the protagonist in the 1908 time frame, so that's how they're connected. And she is at school at Stonebridge University or college, which is in Massachusetts, and that's where the fictitious writer from the 1934 timeline went to college. So that she's sort of the thread for all of them. Tell us a little bit about that character.
1988 grad student. So I did 3 years in Massachusetts at Beverly College in Massachusetts, which used to be an all women's school. That's how I got the idea of an all women's college in the 1930s. So I remember the time period, and therefore I could cheat. I knew I didn't have to research that. If I had any questions, I could just phone a friend. Hey, what did we do on the weekend? Do you remember? And now it's and now the terrifying thing about it is that is historical fiction. So young people they don't know. I was explaining to my kids when I connected to the internet, there was this tone. So you go like, yes. Yeah, when you were on the internet, they're like the things you make up.
I remember that.
So her character, when I was reading her character, and then I was reading your bio and some
Mhm.
interviews that you had given, and it was so interesting to me because I started to wonder how closely drawn this character is, because you did go to school in the same area, and you also she's also Mexican, and she has her great grandmother who has these stories, and you drew a lot from your grandmother. How closely drawn is she? And you don't have to give too much away because there's some, obviously personal things about Minerva that that we learn. But how closely drawn was she? And did that make it easier or harder to write her?
Yeah, I mean, like me, she's a international student on a scholarship. Well, two scholarships. I was also on two scholarships and working on campus. I worked on campus. I was an RA. I worked several gigs on campus, and so there was that. I felt that when we talk about this category called dark academia, it's a very romanticized category in many ways. And people think, oh, it's so cool, these fancy schools and everything is pretty, and they just stay at the level of everything is fancy and pretty, and they don't kind of see all the other stuff that is occurring beneath the surface. It's not the same being a legacy and having a lot of money and going to one of these colleges that having to work in the cafeteria scrubbing dishes like some of my friends did, being an RA like I did, having to always have good grades like I did. There's a lot of pressure. Therefore, sometimes to succeed, sometimes the people that I went to school with were first generation people whose parents have not gone to college at all. And so there was a very huge divide between those people and like the other people that we sometimes met on college who were extremely privileged. And I wanted to use that, which I knew, for this character. The other thing is academia is also, I think, sometimes also romanticized. It's a very, not an academic, but I did do a master's degree in science and technology studies at the University of British Columbia. And I did it later on in life. I was in my 30s. I went back to school. I was a part-time student. I was the oldest student in my class. And one of the fun things about going back to school later in life was that I got to observe the younger students and what they were dealing with, and sometimes the pressures that they had were not the pressures that I had. It felt really with some of my younger colleagues and some people who became very good friends afterwards, that I had a friend who was very kind of anxious and jumpy every time I saw her. I was like, "How are you doing?" And she was like, "I'm trying to finish my bibliography. It's going to be the end of the world if Professor Arnold doesn't get this by Friday. I will absolutely die." And that kind of energy, that kind of pressure, I also wanted to bring it into the novel, how hard it is sometimes, and how around me there were a lot of people that were having a really tough time being in that environment. I mean, I had a hard time too going back to school 10 years later. I think I cried the first week because I was like, I don't, all of these guys, they just finished college, they're fresh out of it. I'm 10 years rusty. I don't remember how to do my citations anymore. And so there was that, but so that kind of anxiety that is present in Minerva, in a lot of her character, I wanted to show that, and I think sometimes people don't like to see that, and especially in female characters. In female characters that have problems, really big about it. They're dealing with shit. They don't want to get out of bed.
Yeah.
They're wearing the same sweatshirts in 5 days in a row. And sometimes
And they're
people-
obsessed with boys,
Yeah.
right?
They're upset. Well, in this case, they're obsessed with literature, but obsessed with boys, boys. And